morning, everyone. My name is Diane Hull, and I am here to talk to you a little bit about communicating your future research plans in your research statement. This is part of Career Services Faculty Job Search Prep Camp. And later on in our presentation today, I'll share with you some of the programs that we have coming up this afternoon, tomorrow, and Wednesday. I am joined by Allison Howard, who is the person on our team who is responsible for putting together all of these amazing programs that many of you have probably already attended or plan to attend more this week. She will be monitoring the chat in the background. So if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to ask them. We will be uploading a video of today's presentation to YouTube, and so you can look for that to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we have a lot of topics to cover in a very short period of time, and so I'm going to get started. Thank you, Allison, for being here. So to talk briefly about what it is we're going to be talking about today, we want to talk a little bit about what are the goals and definitions of a research statement. Most of you probably know, but we really want to go over those details. How are you going to tailor your research statement for tenure expectations at different types of institutions, right? You're going to apply to lots of different places, and it's best if you can really think about tailoring your research statement to each school that you're applying to. What type of content do you want to have? How do you want to structure this? What are some best practices for writing about your research? And then I want to be sure that we share with you resources to help you in writing your research statement, both in career services, additional programming that we have, and beyond. So what is a research statement, right? A research statement is a document that is going to summarize all of the different aspects of your research. And this is going to encompass a couple of different things: previous work, what you're currently working on, and the future direction. And the future direction is really going to be one of the most important pieces of a research statement because you're applying for a job in which you're going to be doing this research there. You can address a funding history, potential for future funding. So this is an opportunity for you to share some of that information. And it can show that you have a plan and that you're a serious scholar, right? That you've been doing all this work over the last few years and that you have a plan to move this forward. Generally speaking, you're talking about 2 to 3 pages, single-spaced, not including figures or diagrams, which we tend to see in STEM fields. Unless you see otherwise, I do think 2 to 3 pages is what you want to look for. Occasionally, you will see a place that only wants 1, or they will say, they're interested in more. But generally speaking, that's pretty good. So there's 3 components to a research statement that I really want to drive home that you want to be conveying. So the first is, why have you chosen to focus on this topic? You're here at Penn for anywhere from 5 to 6 to 7, 8 years, and you have devoted an extensive amount of time to your topic. Why? Why is this interesting to you? Why have you decided to spend so much time on this? 2 is, why should other people be interested in this, right? Why is your work interesting and compelling to others in your field? Why should others care about what it is you're doing? And then the third piece, which is really going to be about 50% of your document, what are your future plans to grow and expand on what you've already done? What's next? Are you going to publish a book? Are you going to run a lab? What is it that you're going to do moving forward? How does this component of the application fit into the other documents that we've talked about? So I know this morning we had some programs on CVs and cover letters. This afternoon, we're talking about teaching. We're talking about diversity. How does this fit in? One of the most important things to think about with a research statement is it needs to be a standalone document, meaning that it is a document that someone could read and get a good sense of what's going on without being referred to the other documents in your application. So you do want to speak to the specific role that you're applying to, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but you don't want to be saying, as stated in my CV or as stated in my cover letter. You really want it to be a standalone, but you can think about how could you incorporate your research into other areas of your application packet. Are there ways in the cover letter and the diversity statement and the teaching statement that you could touch on your research? So what are the goals of a really strong research statement? So again, we're talking about, why is this interesting to you, right? Like, why have you done this? Demonstrating the evolution, like what drove the interest, where have you brought it to where you are now, and where are you going to take it next? This is an opportunity also for you to highlight your research accomplishments, certainly an opportunity to mention publications and funding. You don't have to necessarily list exactly how much money you got or list citations for publications, because you do have that in your CV, but you can refer to, this particular project led to 2 publications. This project was funded by a grant worth X amount of dollars. You also can think a little bit about how are you going to show your potential to pursue future research that is independent, tangentially related, but a little bit different and a little bit innovative, but will also meet tenure expectations at the institution. You really want to be setting forth a program that can actually be achieved. At the end of the day, everyone wants the best candidate for their role, but what institutions really want is someone who can come and do what it takes to make tenure in the time frame. And so having a research plan that illustrates that is really your strongest point. So what are some of the features tailored to the institution, right? Thinking a little bit about how some of your research might benefit the institution. What kind of collaborations might you have? What type of grant money might you bring in? How could you incorporate students into your research? Tailored to the audience of the search committee, meaning, you want to be talking a little bit about things that make sense at that institution. Laid out logically, right? Like they want a plan that they think you can actually execute. And so thinking a little bit about how can you demonstrate that you're a serious scholar and that you want to move forward. And it's also showcasing you as a future colleague, right? So you've spent all this time being a graduate student and working with faculty members, but what you want them to see you now is not as a graduate student, but as someone that they would be working with in the future. So when you find a job posting that you want to apply to, what are some ways that you might be able to find out information about the institution so that you can tailor that research statement? So you can, first of all, take a look at the CVs of the faculty in the department. Where are they publishing? What conferences are they participating in? What grants? You can see sort of where you might have things in common and where you also might be able to fill a void. I would definitely pay more attention to assistant and associate professor CVs, right? Someone that already has tenure, who's been promoted several times, is not gonna be an apples to apples comparison. And so that can be a really great place to start taking a look. Looking at the job ad for any kind of information that you might glean or connections that you might have to give you some information. What department is the position housed in, right? Like sometimes we'll see things that are cross-listed, but it's got to sit somewhere, right? So where is that? Where's the tenure home? Is this a new initiative in which we're bringing in multiple people into different departments? Is it new? Is it new programs? Are you filling a void of someone who retired, right? Having a good sense of that can all be helpful. So where can you get some of this information? A couple of things you can think a little bit about. You can take a look at their website, right? The website of the institution. What are they seeing on the provost page? What are they seeing on the dean's page, right? If it's a college focused on undergraduate research, can you see some of the student research that's been published? Are faculty considered teacher scholars? If you're tenure track, is there money to do summer research? Are they interested, particularly on the STEM side, but can be outside of STEM as well? Are they interested in any collaborations with industry? Does that seem like something they're looking at? So I looked up 2 schools to give you a sense of kind of where you might find information. So using our home institution of Penn as an idea, we're in the middle of a strategic plan, taking a look at the Penn Focus on Tomorrow, introducing a new strategic framework for the University of Pennsylvania. What is it that they're looking for? Like, what are some of the developments that you might see that might guide you in how you're going to write your research statement, right? Now, Penn, as we know, is an R1 institution, focused on teaching, but really focused on research. So that's going to give one perspective. Here's another perspective. This is Stetson University, which is a small university in Florida, more focused on the liberal arts, more focused on teaching. So what I found is that they just hired a new dean for their College of Arts and Sciences, right? So what I'd be curious in is, okay, what happened to the old dean? Did they retire? Did they move on somewhere? Where is this new dean coming from? What are some of the things that he might be interested in? What are some of the things that Kyle Longest, PhD, has indicated he's interested in his first 90 days and his first year at Stetson University? So kind of poking around and finding this information can really be helpful in terms of crafting a research statement that's going to be very specific to the institution that you are applying. So before we get on to actually structuring a research statement, I just want to invite everyone, drop your questions in the chat. Happy to try and answer questions as needed. Again, we're trying to get out of here in 30 minutes, and so I'm going to keep going. But I really encourage you, if you have specific questions, drop them in the chat. If you have the question, probably someone else does as well. Okay, so as we mentioned, the structure of a research statement, what's it going to look like, right? So there's three distinct parts: past, current, and future. But how are you actually going to get started? How are you actually going to sit down and write this? You may have already put together some things in the last few years. If you're someone who's about to go on the market, maybe you've applied for grants in the past. Maybe you've had to present research or create some level of document for other work you've done. So you may already have some things to get started. If not, that's okay. Let's think about how you can sort of start this process of thinking about how you're going to put your research into paper. So when you start thinking about your document, the first thing that you're going to want to think about is a summary, right? Quickly answer important questions that the search committee may have. The past and current research sections can be shorter. And again, we're aiming for about 50% of your statement to focus on the future, right? So if you've got a document that's 2 pages long, maybe the equivalent of a page is going to be future focused. What is it you're going to do next? I do think that section headings and subheadings can help visually organize your statement, right? So you can even title it, you know, past research, current research, looking forward, something along those lines. Do leave white space between sections. You know, if you have a very, very dense document that's single spaced, it can be really challenging to read. And so you want to make it easy to find things. Figures and diagrams that highlight key findings should be included to describe your research if possible. Clear, legible, and intuitive, right? You don't know exactly who's going to be reading all of these documents. I review a lot of research statements for students and for postdocs, and sometimes I get people who put in diagrams that are just so tiny, it's really hard to read. It's because they're trying to squeeze things in. So you want to think about that. And again, it's really, really important to think about that future research being as tailored as possible to the institution, right? So I always give the example of, if you're a STEM student, you don't want to plan that you're going to do some sort of amazing lab work that involves a piece of equipment that costs $500,000 that you know the institution doesn't have, right? Just like if you're at a teaching focused institution and they still want you to do some research, how are you going to incorporate students? We'll get into some examples of that in a moment. So very overwhelming, right? How are you going to get started? So you might have heard in other areas, SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based, right? And so when you're thinking about the research that you want to move forward, how are you going to present your research, particularly the future research, utilizing these SMART goals, right? Like, what are the specific goals that you have moving forward? How are you going to measure the success? Is this attainable, right? As I come back and mention the research equipment that costs $500,000 that you know the institution doesn't have, well, that becomes a little bit less attainable. Relevant, and relevant within the academic institution in which you're applying, right? Are you sort of thinking about goals and putting together research plans that really match well and are relevant to the institution? And time-based, right? If the time to tenure is 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, are you going to be able to accomplish these goals in that time frame? Okay, so first and foremost, about recent and current research, you want to do some brainstorming questions, right? And you can take pen to paper, but you really just want to think about these types of questions. How did you become interested in your topic? Is there a hook that you could share in terms of demonstrating why this has been an interesting topic to you? Why is it still interesting? You've stuck with it all this time, right? And of course, what you want to be doing is moving forward to graduate and move forward, but you've stuck with it. Why? What is it about it? What excites you about it? You know, what has changed over the last few years as you worked on this topic that really gets you energized and excited? It's very possible that you've worked on more than one thing while you were a PhD student or a postdoc. Or if you think a little bit about being a PhD student and now being a postdoc, how are these projects connected in some way, shape, or form? If you've worked in a team, who have been those other people on the team and what were your contributions, right? And you can think about your immediate research team. It's really great to think a little bit about collaborations that you might have had with other academic departments, other centers on campus, other institutions, industry where applicable, right? What have your contributions been to this team and collaboration? Why is your research important? Why does it matter, right? Well, how does it contribute to the field? And the other is, what recognition has your work received, right? We can think about the standard ways in which we think PhD level work is rewarded: publications, presentations, posters, right? Grant funding. So sort of jotting all of this down to really help you think a little bit about some of the things that you might be interested in reporting. Brainstorming questions for your future research, my apologies, future research. What are your short-term goals? And again, short-term, I'm saying like 2 to 5 years, right? What are the goals that you have that you would like to attain while you're in this tenure track role? How do your goals build upon your recent work, right? Thinking a little bit about the things that you've done in the immediate past, you're doing right now. How would these goals build on that? Now, very often people are interested in making a slight shift, right? You're not going to do exactly the same thing that you've been doing all this time, but think a little bit about the skills and experiences that you've obtained through doing your research, and how do these future goals build on that? Who could you collaborate with, right, on their particular campus? Where are places that you think you could get money or resources? What sort of facilities might you need, or facilities in particular that they already have that you would like to take advantage of, right? That's a way that you can specify your research statement to a particular institution. How would you involve students in your work? And I think that that's really important, particularly at a teaching-focused institution, right? Where are there opportunities that you can involve students? You can think about undergraduate students, you could think about graduate students, you could think about future postdocs. And what outcomes do you anticipate from your future work? So once you go through this brainstorming, now you've got to put together a document, right? And so the first thing that you're going to have is an opening summary. This can be pretty short, a quarter of a page, etc. Short and to the point, have a hook to draw the reader in. And again, what you want to think about is the broad context of your research. What are you trying to do? Why is this important? Then you can sort of touch on past and current work, methods, key results, unanswered questions. And then again, why is this important in your role in moving forward? So sort of an opening summary to introduce readers to your research. Then you're going to have a past research section. Again, this doesn't have to be very long, especially if it's not directly connected to the future research that's proposed, right? You may be building on what you're moving forward. But your interest in this, your major research question: what methods, tools, lab skills have you used? Any challenges, right? Not everything always goes according to plan. And I think acknowledging some of those challenges and how you overcame them is helpful. You will encounter challenges in your future research, for sure, guaranteed. At some point, something won't go according to plan, no matter what kind of research you're looking at. There will be a lab error. You will have a trip to do some research that had to be canceled for some reason, right? And so overcoming that is part of your story as well, including research findings, accomplishments, especially publications and grants, which tend to be the things that they're most interested in. And again, the so what question and what unanswered questions have you identified that you want to carry forward as you move forward in your research. So then you want to think about current research. What are you working on right now? Linking what you've done in the past to what you're working on now. Share what's been done, what still needs to be done, right? You may be writing this document today in August and not graduating and defending until the spring. So there's going to be future things to talk about. And the nice thing is that if you have an interview later on in the fall semester, you may be able to give some level of update, what you addressed in your research. Outline what you're working on, key findings thus far, research outcomes, funding, publications. Again, the so what question and what are the unanswered questions. So that's sort of the current research section. But then again, now we're looking at the future research, which is really the biggest piece of what we're talking about here. So it's the longest and probably most important section of the document. Focus on the novel, interesting, and impactful work that you're doing, right? That's what you really want to focus on. But you want to focus on some goals that, again, getting back to those SMART goals that are realistic, able to be funded, and publishable, that are reasonable at their institution. Again, and reasonable can mean a variety of different things. It can mean, do you have the right equipment? What sort of requirements do they have for tenure? And can you do this in the time that is allotted? You can link your future work to the unanswered questions in your previous sections, right? So you can think a little bit about previously, what are some of the unanswered questions that you have, and how can you link your future work to that? Focus on work that is independently yours to the extent that you can, right? You've been working with many other people, but this is really you moving forward as a future colleague. You can identify short-term goals and long-term goals. So if you know that the time to tenure is, say, 4 years, you might think about, in the first year, I'd like to accomplish this. In the second year, I'd like to accomplish this, right? Identifying some short-term goals. Really think about how students could be involved. And I think this is important anywhere, but you're going to really depend on the school and the institution and how they incorporate students into research as you think a little bit about that. But you really want to touch on what are opportunities for other people at their institution to be involved. Outline an overview of your plans and a timeline of the resources, feasibility, who could you collaborate with, right? And that's another way in which you can really make your research statement very specific to the school that you're applying to. If you're able to identify some very specific people or departments or centers or schools in which you see that there's some opportunities. Do a little homework about the funding that you plan to seek. Again, if they have particular funding at their institution, you can touch on that. So one of the things I mentioned earlier is, for people on the tenure track, is there summer money available for people to conduct research in the summer? That would be something that you could touch on. I would plan to apply for this. I would plan to apply for that. So you really want to think about the ways that you can do that. Okay, let's see. Before we get into best practices for writing, let's take a look at these questions. How do you speak about work you do as a research assistant for your advisor in the past research section, especially if it is different than your dissertation research, but in the same field and helped you gain certain expertise? Can you speak about this in your research statement? I would say yes, because what it's showing is that you have the diversity to move in different directions, right? There are lots and lots of people that I talk to who are like, this is what I've been doing for the last 4 years, but I like this and this, but I kind of want to pivot in this new direction. Sometimes they want to pivot in a new direction as a postdoc. Sometimes they want to pivot in a new direction as a faculty member. But I think work that you've done that maybe isn't directly related to your dissertation is all research skills that you're building on. And it's showing that you have the ability to move and pivot in different directions as needed. Because even the plans that you lay out right now may not go exactly according to plan. And so showing that you have some diversity in your background, I think, is really helpful. Would I suggest starting the research statement with current research followed by future and then past, or do I suggest a different order? I really think that you need to have past and present research before you can talk about future. If you sort of talk about past research after the future, it's sort of a little bit discombobulated. So you can decide if you want to start with current research followed by past and then future. But again, future is going to be the bulk, and I think you need to lay the groundwork before you get into that. Let's see. If we have an ongoing book project that is being co-written with one other person, should we include this or focus only on things we are doing alone? I mean, the reality is much of being an academic is finding people to collaborate with. And so I think co-writing a book with others is probably very relevant, and perhaps showing that you have the ability to collaborate with other people. Again, it's going to depend on the institution and what their tenure expectations might be, but I do tend to think that would be something useful to talk about. In the previous session on cover letters, we were warned not to name drop people to collaborate with due to not knowing institutional politics, so you don't accidentally leave someone out. How would you advise we mention who we can collaborate with in a research statement? That's a great question. And my answer to almost every career-related question is, it depends. And it's going to really depend on the institution and who the collaborators could be. So, if you use Penn as an example, we're a large place with 12 different schools, centers falling under schools, then academic departments, right? So there would be a couple of things you could think about. You could mention, I'd really love to work with this particular school or this particular center. There might be a possibility that there are people at that academic institution that you know professionally in some way, shape, or form. So mentioning that you might like to work with them is a little bit less risk with it than someone that you don't know. So you really have to gauge who the people are that you might collaborate with, what relationship might you already have with them, and who is the school that you are applying to. So you have to sort of pick and choose what makes the most sense. To be safe, if you're concerned about, not kind of knowing the politics, I think saying, if I'm in computer science, and I have this interest in something that relates to English, I would see a collaboration that I could do with the English department on here. Probably not the best example, but you don't have to necessarily drop names. Great questions. So let's talk very briefly about writing. So you want to avoid jargon. Here at Penn, everything's an abbreviation, and but you really want to avoid that because you generally you cannot expect that they will know what you're talking about. So you do need to write things out. Vary sentence structures and lengths. Use first person and active voice. This is your research, right? So you can say I, you can say we, you can say I plan to. Utilizing headings and white space I mentioned earlier. Demonstrating your research independence. So be aware of when you use we, right? So when you use we, do you want to reference who that person is, or do you want to stick with I? You have to think about it. Cite strategically, right? As I mentioned, you don't have to specifically write out every publication. You can say, this led to 3 publications. I would absolutely ask faculty and colleagues to provide feedback, particularly if you can find any junior faculty in your department or your area that have sat on a search committee in the recent years. They may have a good sense of what people are looking for. Multiple versions for different types of institutions, and proofread. That's something career services can really be helpful with. You really want to make sure that you proofread. I want to touch very briefly on artificial intelligence. I know that artificial intelligence can be an easy way to get some feedback on some of your writing and some of the things that you're thinking a little bit about. So a couple of things. One is your research is intellectual property. If you put it into ChatGPT or an equivalent, they can keep that information. And so, do you want to share? Is the first question. If you ask an AI program to help you rewrite things, will your voice come through as you would like? And again, it's your research. There are some ways that I think it could be helpful, right? So if you are writing an introduction and in your mind, you're like, I have 3 takeaways I want to make sure, you could put just the introduction into artificial intelligence and say, hey, are my main takeaways up? What are the 3 main takeaways you get from this? And see if you're coming where you're going. This can be really helpful in cross-disciplinary opportunities. So let's say that you are a political scientist and you're applying to a job, but it sits in sociology, but because of what it is they're looking for, it really matches well with some of your background. You might ask, like, would this information make sense to a sociologist? So there are some ways that I think it could be helpful. So resources to share with you, and Allison can drop some of these in the chat as well, so you can easily find them. So we do have a page on our website about application materials for the faculty job search. There's 5 different sections. You'll see in the middle, there's research statements. So I would absolutely welcome you to take a look at that. If you've participated in any of our programs recently, you have probably heard about the PhD Career Training Platform, which is designed to help people like yourself who are thinking a little bit about what they want to do post-PhD. There's a whole faculty career section, and they have a really great video on how to write a research statement. So I encourage you to take a look at this.